Okay guys, we haven't made a video in a long time, so I thought I'd give you an update on where we're at. Came home for 2 weeks for the holidays. Had to do some work from home while I was here. Had to go out with some buddies while I was here, catch up with some friends and family. But we did get quite a bit done. Last time I was here, we finished swapping out the interior. So we've got the black rear quarters, black rear seats, black front seats. I've swapped out the black dash quite a long time ago. I did finish the door panels, so I was really happy with these. These came out nice. They're a mixture of black and gray. I do still have the gray center console in here, but I've got two black center consoles over there. I'm just going to use the better one. Swapped out my radio while I was home. That's wired. It's not pushed in yet because I left the key inside. So this was the old radio. This guy liked to throw bad wiring errors on me all the time, even though I rewired it 3 or 4 times. So I think it's just the stereo. So I had that stereo from the Subaru. I bought it for that, and then we sold the car and bought the Astro, and the Astro uses a single DIN, so we got a different cheap single DIN for that. While I was home this time, we also swapped out the alternator wires and main power wires for 4-gauge wires. So basically just thicker wires. And the reason we did that, if I come over here, these were your stock wires with pieces of them. They're all nicked up. That one's not as bad. Can't find the spots on them now. Maybe on another cut section. But basically these had all kinds of big nicks in them, and it's pretty common to replace them with thicker gauge wires to get more consistent voltage anyway. Basically just slightly better readings in your sensors, more consistent. So we did that, fixed that up. I went ahead and recovered my whole wiring harness. It's hard to see here underneath the intake with tech wiring. If you're following us on Instagram, you'll see all that stuff. Basically, while I was going through, here's one I did here. Redid that all the way down to the alternator. That's the new alternator wire down here. Those kind of T into one go in front of the bumper behind here. I did cut the new bumper. It needs to be redone a little bit. I've got a few spots that are still touching the front mount right here, and it's tough to see, but just a little bit in the fog light bezel is rubbing up here, and that's pushing this side a little far forward and causing it not to sit totally flush. Next time I'm home, I've got another bracket like this that's in much better shape, but it does have to be trimmed for my front mount, so I'm going to trim it down. It doesn't have any broken bolts in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to order some M6 studs to put in there, and then we're going to use thumb screws. Then we're going to order, this bumper came pre-done for quick releases. The last guy had quick release bumper quick releases on it. I'm going to go ahead and order a set of black ones because it only came with this one. I'm going to order a set of black ones. We'll put those on there, and then we can stop zip tying those up. Just because it's a pain to keep having to cut the zip ties. Down here, you notice that when I bought it, there is one crack here on the bumper, and it's right where that mounting tab is. It's putting pressure on it, so I don't really like that too much. I went ahead and put a second zip tie over here on this one just to keep it from tearing too far further. But what we're going to have to do is basically drill a hole here where the crack stops to keep it from going further. And then I'll probably have to figure out how to plastic weld. Well, I know how to plastic weld, I'm just not good at it. I'll have to get a lot better at it and fix that bumper. So I'll probably practice on this broken bumper over here a few times and get the hang of it. Cut the exit pretty big for the side bumper exit exhaust, the Bullfab exhaust. Reason for that, well, not Bullfab, BSFab. Reason for that is because this one actually just melted like twice its size anyway, so I wasn't too concerned with it being a great perfect cut. I'm gonna have to make a cover, so I've got some sheet like this aluminum over here. You can see I cut a hole here where I started to make a template to try to line up the holes right. You can see here how much it actually burnt out after I mounted the last one. So I got the initial hole where I did this pretty close, but I was off by a little bit, and I found that getting a second hole with the hole saw, I planned on doing one hole here and one hole here, and maybe just kind of straighten it out, and I found that the hole saw kept wanting to walk, and so I finally got annoyed and just took my die grinder and cut a square, and then you won't see it at all when I cover it with the bezel anyway. So we'll cut that into a bezel eventually, paint it and mount it up there. What else did we do this weekend? Oh, we sanded this down again. I went ahead and took a flap wheel to it because it still had just lots of flaked rust up on the top here. So I sanded that down, I re-primered it, re-top coated it. There's a few spots down here that still need redone. Obviously I haven't painted down here at all. I ground out some, but there's just spots where the grinder can't reach. So I'm gonna have to do those real slow with the sandblaster. My sandblaster is very hobby grade, so it really can't handle a job this big. I did get this new iron oxide media that's working a lot better. And I did find that my sandblaster actually had some rocks stuck in behind the nozzle. So if you take this off, so where I was using sand before, it actually had some rocks stuck back behind there, and that was blocking the pickup tube. So it actually wasn't working as well as it could. So between those two, it's gotten better, and I just filled up that oxide into that soda bottle to use it. Problem I'm running into now is this oxide is kind of wet, so it's just sticking. So it's not really wanting to pick up. So I'm gonna try it again when the weather warms up a little bit. Oh, I burned out all the bushings in that too. So this is now ready for my subframe bushings, ready for my diff bushings. Unfortunately, the Torque Solutions subframe bushings that I ordered are labeled Eagle Eclipse subframe bushings, but they're actually Camaro diff bushings. So I'm not really sure what I'm going to do there. Probably just going to say fuck Torque Solutions and go with the Paul Volk aluminum ones. They're nicer anyway. But they cost a little more, so it's going to take me a little while longer to source all the parts I need to finish the swap. Still trying to get a hold of his lower subframe arms, control arms. Not lower subframe, just the control arms, the rear control arms. Because I want to run those. And this diff still needs to be inspected. I got a buddy that's going to do that for me. These bushings still have to be burned out. The control arm bushings are right there. I have a full set, but with the Volk control arms, I won't need most of them. But I will need the upper ones for these 3G bushings, or 3G control arms that I'm planning on running for the top. So I'm going to run these, and then I'm going to put a camber kit behind the plate here. Problem I'm running into now is the same problem I run into with all the bushings. They don't want to come off. This bolt likes to seize inside of the steel bushing piece. Piece is a bad word. If I show you another bushing here, there's a diff bushing I haven't burned out yet. You've got this steel center bushing, I guess is the right word, center bushing, that the bolt actually runs through. And the problem is that when the bolts and these bushings start to rust, they fuse together, and then there's no getting them apart. So this is what set me back with getting the suspension off of those knuckles. The bushings were frozen on there. The pain I had getting the subframe apart was the bushings being frozen on every one of them. I think the only ones that came out easily were the diff bolts. These diff mounting bolts came out. I had to hammer, take a soft blow to a breaker bar, but they came out, and they weren't frozen to the bushing on the inside. The bushings themselves, these I drilled out, and then I took a clamp and pushed on them, and I burned on them, and just pried them out, and then finally I took a pair of pliers and reached in there and just wrangled out the center bushings, and then got in there with a wire brush and just rasped the hell out of it. That got these rear diff bushings out. These subframe bushings were a nightmare. I burned them, I cut them, I did all kinds of shit. What ended up working was something I got from another YouTuber named Budget Tuner. Budget Tuner went through the same kind of wranglement that I did in his driveway before his dad suggested using a hole saw. So if you use a 2 1/8 inch hole saw on the underside of this, it fits perfectly inside, and we'll cut this out just enough for you to get in there and then pull it out, pry it out with a flathead screwdriver. You're still going to have to use some heat just to soften it up as you go, and I recommend using a really good drill because I destroyed my cheap ones. So I normally use these cheap $10 Harbor Freight drills. If you follow me on Instagram, this one actually lit on fire. It smokes. And the reason I use those is because I've basically use drills for things they're not meant for. I have good drills laying around, but usually use these cheap ones for jobs like that. I have good cordless ones for doing construction work and when I worked on boats. I used to build boats. But I use those for jobs like that, and that's the second one I broke. The first one I broke was drilling the hole, also with a hole saw, for the front mount, for the VRSF front mount. You have to trim part of the front bumper here. So I tried to drill that out with a hole saw, thinking that would be more efficient. Because it has that stamped steel, the same as I showed you on the rear subframe bolt removal videos, where everybody thinks that they're just going to go in with a hole saw. When you hit that stamped steel, it catches. And when it catches, all that force goes back into your drill, and I snapped a drill in half doing that. The bushings, though, I went and bought this nice Hitachi from Lowe's. I had some Lowe's gift cards from Christmas. So I went up there. That's a 8 amp, I think, 8 or 9 amp drill. 9 amp. And went through that. Even with the nicer drill, though, I still had to go slow. It still wanted to get hot. So what I did there is I sprayed it with PB Blaster just to keep it cool. I would spray the bit with PB Blaster, let it go, and when it started to, when the bit started to smoke, I would pull it back and let it sit and cool, and spray it again, and spray the bushing with Blaster, and just keep going and keep going. You get maybe an 1/8 inch at a time, and eventually you won't get all of the bushing out, but you'll get far enough in that you can jam a flathead screwdriver in there and just pry it out. Or a pry bar works really well. Problem I ran into with the pry bars, they're just too big. I did use these throughout the job, but they're just too big to really work well. I think what I ended up using was a chisel for most of it. I think I broke one of my chisels doing it, but not too concerned. Yeah, it's this one. This one was actually an old bone chisel that someone gave me. Yeah. But that'll work. So, long and short, this is kind of on hold until I can source some more parts for the all-wheel drive swap. This thing is just about ready to race again. We did race it last year at Muncie. I don't know if I uploaded the video for that. We did race it last year at Muncie on my club's track day. Basically, my club rented out the track for the day. The problem I ran into that day is we were stuck in third gear. There was a wire going to the transmission that had broken. So the car ran beautifully. It just wouldn't go faster than like 50 miles an hour. And it wouldn't launch well because you're trying to launch from third gear, so it'd be a huge delay. So I was getting like 2-3 second reaction times instead of like fractions of a second. But for my first time down the track, you know, the goal last year was get the car down the track. We did that. Now it's get down the track in all 4 gears. So this year I think we're on pace to do that. A problem briefly where it wouldn't rev up over 3,000 or 4,000. That ended up being that the fuel settings were set for much smaller injectors than I have, or larger injectors than I have. I think they were set up for 1200s, and I'm running 880s. So I had to redo some of my global settings, adjust it in, and that's where I was driving around with the MAF settings last time I was home. And this time, just switched it over to speed density. Now I just need to have time to do it. I didn't have a working headlight for most of this weekend, so I didn't want to drive at night. I got that fixed last night. That ended up being when I installed the side exit. I basically strapped every wire I found hanging that looked like I deleted it up with zip ties up out of the way so they wouldn't catch on fire or melt. And one of them ended up being the headlight connector. The headlight wasn't plugged in. But yeah, a couple hours of going through wiring diagrams and chasing stuff with voltmeters, and ended up just being unplugged. Other things we had to do. Last thing we had to do was getting it on the dyno last year. We ended up not being able to get a dyno run in. We got on the dyno about 5 minutes before they closed, and then the side exit basically blew smoke straight at their computers. They said no. But he did drive around with me for a little bit and get it dialed in a little better than it was, but with all the problems it had, his tune basically had to start over. My boost controller was dirty, so you would turn up the boost and it would actually end up going a little higher for a second and then running even lower than it did before. So the tuner actually was the one who recommended a fix for that. He basically said it's almost certainly that. Take it apart, spray it down with WD-40, put it back together. The Hallmans almost always are fixable, they're just dirty. And that ended up being exactly right. The issues that we were having running up until that point ended up being with my fuel pump housing. When I did that bulkhead mod where I drilled out a bulkhead to make it fit. That does work, but the pump doesn't actually like to sit in there. And so this is the fix. The pump doesn't actually like to sit in there very well. It will blow back out. And so what we ended up doing is on the fuel pump, on the fuel pump, we just cut a piece of submersible hose and put it underneath that and then pushed up in the hose. And that basically gave the O-ring something to push up against and not be able to blow out. It kept blowing O-rings out, and then I would drop down to having only like 20 psi of fuel pressure or 5 psi of fuel pressure at idle, and the car just can't run like that. It needs to be 43 psi. So just putting that O-ring in there was enough to get the car running and driving for now. Long-term solution is this guy right here. I sent this over to my buddy, and he actually cut the stock fuel pump hanger off of my stock fuel pump housing. I went to a hydraulic shop and got some JIC bulkhead fittings, which are the same thing as AN. They're just steel instead of aluminum, which this is a steel metal anyway, so that's what you need. He welded that on there, and then he just hung this back where it goes at the stock height, using this stock pump as an example, and welded it back together. So now I can use a stock mount, stock O-ring, stock everything. I can run my Walbro 255 with that. Should work fine with a AAM 340. I think if you have a Walbro 450, they're a little taller, so you might need to change your height a little bit. This one is going to be my all-wheel drive one. He did the same thing for that for me, but this one we had already cut and lost the stock hanger, so he went ahead and just made a new one for me in his lathe. And he did this really cheaply for me. I think he did both of these for around $100. So I'm really happy with that. I think there might be a small hairline crack on one of these, so I might have to go over it with some JB Weld or have him re-weld it, one or the other, before I can run them. But other than that, these are great, and they should solve my problem permanently. We're running the 8AN fuel lines now. So it's an 8AN feed. I ended up getting a deal on a 10AN pump or filter. So it's an 8AN feed up to the filter, and then I just use a 8 to 10 reducer or 10 to 8 reducer, and then on the other side I just ran a 10 straight into my Magnus fuel rail. So these are good. I've got a buddy rebuilding a 16G for me, so we're going to take this 14B we put on last summer off, put a bigger 16G on. After we get the car idling right, I don't want to change anything else until I get the car running 100% right, because there's just too many variables. But we'll put that on, and we've got the Mamba 3-inch compressor housing for it, so it'll flow a little bit more. But it's basically just a big 16G. Not sure if we raised the coolant pressure with a Greddy cap. I found that a lot of people are concerned when you talk about raising coolant pressure, because they're concerned either your heater core or your radiator can't take the increased pressure. So the thing to realize though is that I've got an upgraded radiator, which is a lot, I don't have the plastic top that the stock radiator has, so that can take a little more pressure. The heater core is the same heater core that's used on an Avenger, on a Sebring, and on a 420A Eclipse. And the Avengers and Sebrings actually run a higher base pressure than the Eclipse turbos do to start with, so my raised pressure here is just stock for what that heater core is rated for, so it's fine. The advantage here is that you're raising the boiling point of the water, so the coolant can actually keep the engine a little cooler. It's a little less likely to overheat. In my case, because I'm running an AC condenser and a front mount, there's a whole lot of airflow restriction there. So I had made this custom flashing under here, and there's another one underneath that kind of directs the airflow, and that's the first thing everybody will recommend to you on tuners, and I absolutely do recommend it because it did make a difference for me. I'm running that, and I'm running the two CX Racing fans, one pusher, one puller. I added a Mishimoto fan this year to the other side. And all that helps, but I was still having temp issues. Which I think were mostly related to my fuel issues, but I did end up having them done. I did end up raising the pressure to help just give me a little bit of safety measure, and adding the extra fan. Those got me where I was, and now that I've got the fuel more in line, that problem actually just went away. So now these are just kind of extra insurance. Along the same line, I had this guy ceramic coated by Booston, and I'm debating sending out my Megan O2 housing and my side exit this year. Might wait till next year. There's just some other things I want that I want to do first. But I would like to get those all coated and have them all be matching, and I need to get that intake coated. When we get the Mamba compressor housing, that gets rid of the J-pipe. That's the main reason I bought another compressor housing. The stock big 16G compressor housing is fine for what my goals are, but I really hate having J-pipes. They leak. This one leaks. This is the 5th one I put on here. I've got a small collection of J-pipes in that bucket over there. This one seals the best, but it does still leak around 20 psi or so out of the bolt holes. And I've changed gaskets and done this and that and machined things and had things flattened, and they still leak. So I hate them. So those are going to go away. And hopefully the car will be a little bit more runnable this summer. So I'm hoping to get some time slips in. All right, guys, that's it.